Hi, I'm Diana Watt, and today we're going to tackle a very serious subject, but one I think that people need to stop and pay attention to. So often we hear the words war on women, and I don't think we're taking it seriously enough, especially when it comes to the lives of women in other parts of the world. Their lives are very much at risk, and they are brutalized in many different ways. And today we're going to talk about rape and the rape of very young little girls, 8 years old, 9 years old, and the forced marriage or marriage by abduction. We're also going to talk about secondary victimization. Today I'm going to be talking via Skype with Talal Amanu. He's the Executive Director of Hand of God Ministries day-to-day activities in Gondar, Ethiopia. He is also on the board for let me make sure I've got this correct. I'm going to read this to you. He is the General Secretary for all the churches in the Northeast region of Ethiopia's Evangelical Church Fellowship. Not only that, he is a teacher in Gondar, Ethiopia. So I'm going to bring in this Skype conversation with Talal where we jump right into the subject of rape and the way women are treated before they're raped and after. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yes. Rape is very common in the northern part of Ethiopia, especially this in the Amhara state. Rape is very common. Nowadays, it is starting to decline, but formerly it was very, very, very terrible. You know, women get raped because they are working hard and they are exposed for very harsh environmental conditions. They go out for taking care of cattle or sheep or other things, or they go out to the forest to collect firewood from the forest. So when they go out to the forest, they get raped. Or when the school is very far from their village, they walk long distance to go to school. So either when they go to school or when they come back to school, they have to walk long distances and they get raped there. In addition to this, early marriage and selling children, selling girls for marriage is very common. You know, early marriage is like when they are 8 or 9 or 10 or 11, you know.
Yeah.
The parents, let them get married. And this causes a disease called fistula. You know about fistula?
Oh, fistulas?
Fistula, you know, yeah. the vagina and the anal, they tear down and and she cannot control her bowel, you know? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it's very terrible, and it's because of early marriage, you know.
So these little girls are 8 years old, and their parents sell them off to be married, and they are basically raped at 8 years old because nobody at 8 years old would want to have sex.
Yes.
And they are damaged for the. And then what happens once they're married and they're damaged? Then what?
Then they are thrown away.
Then they're thrown away.
Nobody, you know, even the husband and, you know, the parents will not take care of them. And it's very difficult disease, you know. They feel shame. And they are, you know, thrown by the society as a whole. So nowadays, the government of Ethiopia have established a separate hospital for fistula patients. Only for fistula patients. And it takes months, even years, to treat the fistula patient. If she is admitted to the hospital, she has to be treated by a psychiatrist. She has to be treated physically.
In the rest of the world, a vaginal fistula is generally due to a serious complication during childbirth. Most gynecologists and obstetricians will go their entire careers without ever coming across a case. In Africa, however, it's become an epidemic. and the numbers are not rising due to complications during childbirth. Traumatic fistula is an abnormal opening between the vaginal wall and another body cavity, and it's the direct result of sexual violence. Usually violent rape, mass rape, or the insertion of awful items such as gun barrels, beer bottles, and jagged sticks cause a rupture between the vaginal wall and the bowel, or the vaginal wall and the bladder, or often both. Women with fistulas are unable to control the constant flow of urine or feces that leak from the tear. Affected women are very often divorced by their husbands, shunned by their communities, and are unable to work or care for their families. Traumatic fistulas compound the psychological trauma of being raped. Because let's face it, not only have these women been very violently raped, they are now at risk for unwanted pregnancies. They are at risk for sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV, which is very prevalent in the African continent right now. And to add to that, their opportunities to marry are greatly diminished. Their opportunities to work are diminished, and to just participate in the society around them because of the stigma of being raped and the stigma of incontinence.
What happens to a woman, a regular woman, who goes out to the farm in the wee hours of the morning without people to protect her because she has to take care of the cattle? She gets raped, and then how do people treat her after she's raped?
You know, usually they feel shame. They feel shame, and they don't go to the police, or they don't tell their parents because they feel shame, and they hide it. They hide their hurt, and they become, they are considered as, a prostitute, or they are considered as, neglected girl, and nobody accepts her.
So society, if she tells anybody at all, society rejects her?
Yes.
Okay. And then if she gets pregnant from that rape, what happens then?
If she gets pregnant, even her parents will punish her. You bring shame for the family, they say. You bring shame for the family. So the girl will suffer a lot. The girl will suffer a lot. And finally she will leave the house and go for somewhere to hide from her parents, to hide from the society. That's why there are a lot of raped mothers here in Gondar. They came from rural villages.
So they left the rural villages. Do they have homes there, or are they homeless with children? What's the... When they leave their rural villages and don't have any support, how do they, with a child, how do they live?
They suffer a lot. They suffer a lot. Sometimes or many times they abandon their child, and they leave it somewhere just outside the house. And even I saw one time a child who was dead and who was eaten by dog and animals. The children, yes, it's very terrible. The girls, they throw their children, because nobody is taking care of them. They have no support. They lost hope. So they throw their children. And if you go to the police, or if you go to several places, you can find a lot of children abandoned. A lot of not children, they are infants.
So let's talk about what Hand of God Ministries is doing as far as... we do a couple things.
We call it men's conference.
Men's conference.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you teach men, or what do you talk about?
We teach men about treating women as human beings. They are not things that men usually use them and throw them. So we let them how a good man, how to be a good husband, how to be a good man, how to be a good brother, and how to be, a good person in the society. So it is not only the responsibility of the woman, but also the responsibility of the man to treat women. Women are their mothers, their sisters, and their children. So men has to treat women according to the book written in the Bible.
Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is our Young Mothers program. A lot of those young mothers were rape victims, correct?
Yes.
Most of them?
Yes, most of them.
Okay. And what do we do with them?
We are doing is we take care of their kids.
Mm-hmm.
We take care of their kids. In the morning, they bring their children to the family care center.
Right.
Of Hand Ministry. So they bring their children to the family care center and they leave their children there and they go home for work or they go to school. And we, Hand of God Ministry, takes care of the children the whole day. And at the end of the day, around 5 or 6, they come back, the mothers come back and collect their children. But when they come back and collect their children, we serve them dinner. We serve them supper. So when we serve them dinner with their kids, we also teach them about Jesus Christ, about HIV/AIDS, about birth control methods, about doing a small business, and we psychologically treat them because these girls are devastated, not only physically, but also psychologically. So we build up their psychology. We build up. We show them love. We show them love and we respect them. And, within a short period of time, we see a change. We see a change in their mind,
Right.
They usually consider themselves as unwanted part of the society. They consider themselves as rejected by the society. They feel shame. So we try to avoid that shame. We try to make them feel that they are part of the society. They are part, and they are not their fault.
Right.
Yeah, it is not their fault. So we try to encourage them and back up them.
Because we all know that God loves them and that He's going to be there with them. And if we show them love, that's the great commandment, love one another. Well, Talon, I just wanted to say I love you, my brother. And
we thank Talon and Manu for all the wonderful work he does for Hand of God Ministries. Talon talked earlier about little 8-year-old and 9-year-old and 10 and 11-year-old girls being given away for marriage. But what Ethiopia is also well known for is something we call marriage by abduction. And that is that a man will abduct a young woman or child and he will rape her consistently until she's pregnant. And once she's pregnant, he will then bring her out into the village and say, look, she's pregnant with my child, therefore she's my wife. And that woman, she's not consenting, or that child is not consenting. She is raped into marriage. Now, if she should develop a fistula, small little girls should not be raped. The damage to them is unbelievable. And he can just toss them by the side of the road. If he damages them in the process, so what? Toss them by the side of the road. Everything about rape in Ethiopia screams secondary victimization. Now, what do I mean by secondary victimization? I mean the damage done after the rape. The rape, while horribly violent, so violent that it can literally put a physical hole in a woman's body, is not secondary victimization. That's the first trauma. The second trauma comes from a society and a family who think that it's her fault, who are ashamed of her presence after her rape is become known. You would think that at some point they would say, geez, that happened to my sister, that happened to my mother, and it's clearly not their fault, but that's not the attitude. And the attitude only further damages the already broken and hurt. Because not only is it a bad attitude, it's not just shame. They literally cast aside the young girls, throw them away, push them away. When I was ages 5 to 7, a man who lived in our home came into my room at night and molested me. And when my parents found out, my mother said to me, "Don't you ever tell anybody about this, or I'll punish you." And she meant it. Now, I don't tell you this to feel sorry for me. I tell you this to illustrate what secondary victimization can do. It is a mindset that says, you did this, you earned it, and I'm ashamed of you, and I don't want to hear it again. And then if it happens again, it's pretty much what the girl assumes is natural. Because at 7 years old, I realized that if it happened to me again, I wasn't supposed to say anything to anyone. I wasn't even supposed to tell my parents. In the type of home I was raised in, there was more than one man living with us over the years. And it happened more than once to me. But from that point on, I learned not to say anything to my parents because nothing was going to happen to benefit me. I kind of thought that it was the way I was supposed to be treated. And it happened more than once, and it even happened in my young adult life because I didn't know I was worth anything. Hand of God Ministries is trying to step into that chasm and say to these young ladies, no, you are worth something. You are a child of God, and you are worth something. And people should care, and your life is of value, and you should not be thrown away. And we're trying to tell these young women who are giving birth to babies born out of something horrifically violent that love is good, and to love that child, and that child too is a child of God. We want you to step in the void with us. We want you to fill in those gray spaces of not caring and say to these young women, you are loved. You are worth loving. You are a child of God. I ask you to consider helping us teach the young men in prisons there with our prison ministry how to become better men. And I ask you to consider helping the men's conference to change the culture of rape and the attitudes that go along with it. A story in Addis Ababa of a young American woman who worked in Addis Ababa. She was heckled often, and she learned not to go anywhere at night by herself, anywhere at all in the daytime. No alleys, no back ways, out in public. And she said that the attitude of the police, if a young woman was raped, was, what did you do to deserve it? That is slowly changing in Ethiopia, but it's going to take a lot more of us and a lot less of them. And we're going to have to help the men and the fathers of young girls who have been raped stand up and say, that's my little girl. You don't get to do that to her. There are a few courageously stepping up now, but we wanted to make it a place where all men courageously step up for the women in their lives. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be telling more stories of rape from the young ladies in our program. And they're not pretty, but they're real. And I hope that you get to know the young women who we love so very dearly, and who are bright, funny women with gorgeous children, and they deserve a chance. Thank you. Bye.